homeschooling isn't always picture perfect. Welcome to Homeschooling with Dr. B, where we'll help you find solutions to the challenges you face and celebrate your successes with you. Now, please welcome your host, Dr. B.
Welcome, my tenacious homeschool tribe. We continue with Here We Go. Because a lot of people are starting homeschooling in September. So just recently, as I was thinking of homeschooling and the challenges that I would be personally facing, homeschooling the 9th grade, probably till the 12th grade, I remembered an old employer. Her name was Linda, and she made a retirement comment. She said, "I'm sick of this. I don't want to learn anything new. Computers are just too hard. This is too overwhelming. We should still have secretaries. I'm done. And I personally had never felt that way in any of my specific professions. But recently I felt that way about homeschooling. I was like, oh, man, there's so many new things to learn, to teach. And then one day, as I was hanging out with some of my husband's friends who are primarily entrepreneurs, I was remembering a quote by Alvin Toffler. He wrote in Future Chalk, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." And his point not only applies to homeschooling parents, and apply in a major way, because we are learning new material. We are unlearning old material. I often hear parents say, "Why do I have to teach math differently? It worked the old way." But it works a new way too. And that's what our children are going to be facing when they move forward. So what's the big deal? So we are unlearning and we are relearning, learning new ways of doing things. But this doesn't just apply to parents. And we've made it one of the major points in our homeschooling journey. I mean, after all, one of the benefits of homeschooling is that we can set those points or standards or goals, right? So as a homeschooling family, we decided to place a lot of emphasis on our kids' ability to pivot, meaning learn, unlearn, relearn. And why is that? Because this world is changing so fast. In order to have access to a stable, let alone a successful economic life, you need to be able to pivot. I mean, how many of us went through several careers? I remember when I was training to be a secretary, my mother thought was going to be the end for me. I was always going to be a secretary. Of course, that was not the case. I had different goals than my mother did for myself. But that meant learning and unlearning a lot of things. And the average adult does go through an average of 7 careers in their lifetimes. It's not like it used to be when our parents graduated from college and went on to their jobs and they stayed with either one profession or got employment someplace and stayed with that specific company until they retired. Our children need to be prepared for a completely different future. So, what does that mean? To learn. For me as a homeschooling teacher, it means not being frightened of new subjects. I didn't know anything about astronomy when I taught it. I learned as I went, not just from the kids' book, but from additional research that I did to create projects, to develop assignments. So I really got into astronomy. We have these 2 honking telescopes in our living room in the Caribbean because we were taking astronomy. My grammar wasn't great because my parents unschooled me during some of those critical years. And so I've always had to work really hard with grammar. Guess what? I've learned more grammar as a homeschooling mom than I did when I went to elementary school. And I have to admit, I'm decent in math. I'm not gifted like my daughter, but I am capable of learning math, and I'm more than capable of teaching it. And frankly, I love teaching math nowadays. And part of the reason I love it so much is because I'm learning so much. I know I keep bringing up Saxon. I'm a Saxon fanatic. Please forgive me. But one of the things I like about it is for somebody like me that finds math daunting, it teaches it in such a way that you learn the skills individually before it puts them all together. So even though I hate geometry, I have been enjoying geometry. And even though I used to feel really overwhelmed about the idea of teaching trigonometry, I'm like, easy peasy. So as a homeschooling mom, as a homeschooling teacher, I've learned a lot by teaching my kids. Now, looking at the flip side of the coin, learning for students. We get carried away with the idea that learning should always be fun. It should be fun as much as possible, but it isn't always possible. And sometimes learning can be painful because it's taking us out of our comfort zone. I remember once when I was still teaching at the college level, one of my students started just tearing up during one of my sociology lectures. And I stopped to make sure she was okay. And the big thing was that her perception of the world had completely changed during a point in our lecture. Her paradigm of society had shifted. But that's also part of what's so exciting about learning. We're learning to see the world from a different point of view. We are acquiring more knowledge. And as students, we need to be prepared to accept those moments. They are going to happen if we are good students and we have good teachers. Our perspective of the world will change. And that's a good thing because it means the world is getting bigger, not staying small. So we really need to teach our kids, our homeschoolers, to embrace the discomfort that is learning. And at the same time, to embrace the excitement that is learning. There is certainly a dichotomy there. And we need to be open to both. Back to mom as the teacher. Unlearning. Don't close yourself off to learning to do things a different way. Now, after I say that, I have to be honest with you and tell you that I do that all of the time. I have a very regimented mind. I have a very structured mind. And it's always looking for that comfortable thing. Okay, I've been doing this way for 100 years. I should be able to keep it. I should be able to hold on to it. But one of the wonderful things I've unlearned, not as a homeschooling mom, but as a mother, is, well, it's still not easy to let go of those old ideas. I can do it. Not only am I capable of doing it, but it's good for me to do it. And it's good for my kids to see me do it. Because students learn more through the examples that we set than by the things that we say. I've also unlearned some of my old prejudices. For example, hating math. I hated math as a student. And I specifically hated it even more when I had my poor teacher. He had late stage skin cancer. And he taught the first semester of geometry. By then he was pretty sick. He wasn't doing very well. And he tended to give us credit for good ideas. So he leaves because of health reasons. In comes a new teacher. And I think something like 95% of the class went from getting A's to getting F's. It was quite life-changing. As a result, I had to retake math again. Well, not math, geometry. The dumb thing about it was that when I went and I spoke to my counselor, he said, don't bother taking the first semester. You did great on it. You just need to take the second semester. So what happened the second time I took it? Same thing as the first. I got a D. So this confirmed to me that I was lousy in geometry. I was lousy in math, and I just needed to move forward. Wrong. The problem was in that first semester, I didn't learn the foundations. I didn't have the foundational skills to move on to the second semester. No matter how many times I took the second semester, my house of cards was going to fall apart because the foundation was not there. And of course, now that I'm teaching math to my kids, who also don't particularly enjoy it, even though all three girls are really, really good mathematicians, Andy being gifted, is attitude goes a long way. So despite the fact that I started by hating math, Saxon math taught me to enjoy it. And with every day, that pleasure became a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, it is important to unlearn this idea that there's only one way to teach things. So, for example, for vocabulary, one of the things that I did was, originally I went with the old school thing. They give you the list, you write the words, meanings, and then you have to memorize it, and then you spew it back out, and good for you. Did you actually learn to use the word? No. And I found this program that went through this whole process where you had to understand the meaning within the contents of a specific paragraph or story. And then you also had to be able to write a paragraph using the words. Now, I first resisted it, even though it seemed like a great idea, because I thought, well, this is going to take so much time and there's so many other things to do. And we have all of these extracurricular activities. And how am I going to juggle this, right? But I gave it a chance. And I'm so glad I did. My kids have a fabulous vocabulary. They're just absolutely fabulous. And not only does it come in handy when they're writing, I hope it comes in handy when they're doing their testing, such as the SAT or ACT, and will certainly benefit them greatly when they move on to college and the business world, or whatever world they choose to be part of. The flip side of the unlearned coin are homeschoolers. Yes, our kiddos have things to unlearn too. And the first big one when you start homeschooling is they need to unlearn to do things the way they did them in school. One of the big things that my kids had to unlearn was to waste time. Initially, they wanted to take as long as they did in school to do their work when we started homeschooling. It was just bonkers. They would take the whole day. It took them a while to figure out that they could get the work done faster and enjoy their day. Now, of course, they're very aware of it. They want to focus on their work, get it out of the way, enjoy their extracurricular activities, enjoy their friends, and enjoy their specific interests. One of the things that I've also been emphasizing with them is that they need to unlearn to do things quickly. And I think this happens because in a school setting, you have such a limited amount of time to work with students, right? So the students are rushing through everything. Well, in homeschool, I really have focused on unlearning that process. And instead of focusing on doing things quickly, I have them focus on doing things accurately. Of course, much to my chagrin, my homeschoolers learned to cram. And they learned this when they were still in school. So lately, it's been more of a fight because I want them to develop better habits before they go on to college. I don't want them cramming. Cramming is not good for anybody. You're not actually learning anything. You're making yourself sick. Stressing yourself out is so unnecessary. In fact, I highly, highly recommend a book called Learning Outside the Lines Two Ivy League students with learning disabilities and ADHD give you the tools for academic success and educational revolution. I believe the name of the author is Jonathan Mooney. When I read it, I was like, this is amazing. Chapter 4-9 is great for middle schoolers, for high schoolers, and if I was still a college professor, I would make it mandatory reading for all of my students. They really stress developing good study skills, but at the same time, they teach you what to do when you get yourself in a pinch and you didn't have adequate time to prepare your assignment or prepare for a test. So it does teach us some excellent skills, but it also does deal with the realities of college when you sometimes have to do less than you should, but you still need to get that good grade. Relearn. What do I mean by relearn? Relearn how to learn. Listen, this is key. I can't tell you the number of students that go to school, spend 4 years there, and never learn to learn. They learn to memorize, they learn to study for a test, but they don't actually know how to learn. So the first thing as a teacher is learn how to learn. Be able to break subjects into its basic components, put them back together, and explain them to your students. And that is a key to relearning how to teach. I have a lot of moms that say, well, I'm not sure that we're going to continue homeschooling. Teaching can be really hard, especially once you get beyond the elementary school years. It's the same idea. Let go of the old and learn how to do it differently. That's it. Relearn patience. All of us have a different degree of patience with our kids, but having our kids 24/7 can add additional stress. So you really need to learn to be patient under these new circumstances. Take it easy on yourself and be compassionate to your kids. Relearn how to be excited about things that might be old hat to you, but they're brand spanking new to our kiddos. Now, frankly, that's one of the most fabulous things about parenting is seeing the world from the perspective of my kids. Now, I admit it is a little aggravating now that they're teenagers and they think I don't know anything. I know it's just going to be a few years and then eventually they'll realize, hey, mom did know a few things. But overall, understand, accept that this might be an old hat to you, but it's brand spanking new to your kids. And your homeschooler needs you to be patient and compassionate. And if you can, join them in that excitement. Participate in the joy that is exploring a new subject for them. Of course, relearning also applies to our children, our homeschoolers. Our homeschoolers relearn something when they relearn how to do something a different way. I have one child that's really stubborn. Once she learns to do something a certain way, she doesn't want to relearn. It's like, okay, it's old hat. I got it. Don't go there. But sometimes a new situation requires a new way of either teaching, learning, doing. So it's important to cultivate that habit in our homeschoolers. And the reality is if they have been to a traditional educational setting, they're going to be relearning just about everything. Homeschooling is typically completely different than their traditional school experience. The pace is different. The teacher's fabulous. And the way that we develop or teach is typically different, right? We don't have a script telling us what to do and when to do it. They also have to relearn to be independent because typically in a traditional setting, you have a teacher that's constantly reminding you that you need to turn in things, when you need to turn them in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm seeing this again with my children that decided to go back to a traditional school setting. Whereas when you're a homeschooler, typically mom, certainly I, have taught my kids to be more independent. Hey, this is when the assignment is due. I'm not going to be reminding you every day to do it. Get it done at your own pace and know that you were expected to have it done by a certain time. And that also means that your child will be relearning to be self-accountable. Now, one of the things that I often see with new homeschoolers is that accountability is oftentimes taken on by the parent. I didn't do that. I wouldn't do that because it just would make more work for myself. And I want my children to have the skill set to be accountable for themselves. Of course, I could go on and on with that list, but I'm not going to. What is important for me and for my husband is that in this ever-changing world, we need to prepare our kids to pivot on a dime, to be able to change directions, because the world is changing rapidly. This is key for our homeschoolers. I mean, think about COVID. It really drove home the point that we need to be able to do things differently at a moment's notice. So remember to learn, unlearn, and relearn. This podcast episode is sponsored by HydroFeet, the insole that massages your feet with every step. Use the code OMB15OFF for an additional 15% off at hydrofeet.com. Don't forget, if you're willing to pay for the shipping and handling, they will send you a second pair. And the pairs do not have to be the same size or the same type. Life can be totally overwhelming, but homeschooling doesn't have to be. Don't forget to check out our new Facebook support group by searching for Homeschooling with Dr. B or going to our website for more links and resources. Till next week, enjoy your kiddos.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Homeschooling with Dr. B. Head over to homeschoolingwithdrb.com for more information and resources. That's homeschoolingwithdrb.com. Until next time.